Hello Void Dwellers and welcome to 2025. I talked before about how I like to meet people in the VR chat app Big Screen, which allows people to open rooms and have conversations with other people from all over the world. And you get to meet a lot of perspectives and opinions, from the interesting to the putrid. You also get to see that the problems we have around the world with the human creature are just that. A species issue rather than regional issues. The same patterns and the same fallacies repeat again and again and again. I find it frustrating that people in general seem to have trouble with proper arguments. And it doesn't matter if it's right-wingers or leftists or atheists or religious people or anti-Semites or pro-Israelis, they all seem to fall constantly to the same exact traps. Number one, arguing with a perceived group rather than the person in front of them. Number two, inconsistency. Number three, misusing logical fallacies and failing to see the correct ones. And number four, attaching an emotional baggage to their arguments. Let's break this down. In reality, number one and number four go hand in hand because they are both derived from the perception of the group. And I've noticed that many times. The moment someone hears something I say that is in contradiction to one of their beliefs, they assume I belong to the group that usually holds similar beliefs, even if the words that are coming out of my mouth disprove that. It happens in this very channel all the time. Many people who catch a single video of mine, especially if it's a video against antisemitism, immediately assume that I belong to the right-wing bloc, because in their minds, anti-Israeli views are left and pro-Israeli views are right. Or they turn on you if you don't follow all the points that are dictated by whatever manifesto they happen to read at the time. For example, atheists tend to think I'm part of their group until I say that I do not believe that religion is the source of all humanity's problems, because humans can be evil to each other even without religion. And every time I utter that belief, the arguments against me hilariously become about there's no reason to believe in God. Which is besides the point. My argument wasn't that there is a God or not, but about if following religion specifically is what drives people to violence and horrible deeds. And my conclusion is that no, that the religious frame of mind doesn't actually need a proper religion to exist. The Nazis followed their own race theory with the same zealous, and they committed horrible acts for that religion. But the moment I digress from the dogma, one could say the religious dogma, that religion itself is the problem, I am immediately thrown into the theist box, and they don't seem able to even hear me. Another example can be that Luigi guy who murdered the CEO of the health insurance company in the US. Every time I dare to say that I don't think murdering each other in the streets is the solution to America's healthcare issues, I get the same ridiculous comeback. They expect us to take pity of this guy who murdered thousands by denying care. That's not what I said at all. And I still get those kind of responses, even if I prefix my argument with the assertion that I believe this guy was an immoral, evil bastard who shouldn't have been allowed to do the things that he did. But they don't seem to hear that, because as far as they are concerned, there are only two possible options. You either believe that person should have been murdered, or you believe we should pity him as a poor defenseless victim. And that leads me to the point about people falling for logical fallacies. If you ever argued with anyone online, you probably heard the term strawman. Most people don't actually take a class in logic to learn about that concept. They just heard it on social media, and therefore they are using it incorrectly. They seem to think it's a magic phrase that just immediately invalidates the other person's argument, regardless of what was said. A strawman is only the case if someone derives from your original argument a conclusion that is not logically implied by it. For example, if I say we should invest in education, and my opponent says, well, Raz thinks we should take money away from infrastructure, that is a strawman, because the one is not logically implied by the other. But most people would use it whenever they don't have a way to deal with the argument. For example, I had a discussion with someone about free will and determinism, and I made my point that I don't believe free will exists or is even possible to properly define and identify. And he disagreed, so I asked if he believes in luck, and he said no. Luck is only lack of knowledge. If you toss a coin and you had all the knowledge of the conditions in the system, you would be able to predict the result every single time. Okay, I said. So you agree that the universe is deterministic, is governed by cause and effect, and therefore there could not be free will. And the guy was positively screaming at me, "Strawman! I didn't say that!" That's not a strawman. If we agree that the point of free will is to be able to make a decision outside of causality, and you say that you believe the world is governed by causality, it is logical to conclude that you say that there is no such thing as free will. And by the way, I do believe in choice rather than free will, and I made a couple of videos about that, links in the description if you are interested. But the point is, he couldn't deal with the argument, so he found refuge in the warm bosom of the magic phrase, strawman. Ironically enough, most people fall to a much more common logical fallacy, the false dilemma fallacy. It's when people believe they are faced with only two options, even when there's no logical reason to believe that. For example, if you say that we either ban movies that show drug use or all kids will do drugs, that's not just a dilemma fallacy, it's also simply illogical because there's no real causality between the two. But most people would still go for such arguments. Like the example I gave before about that Luigi guy and the CEO. You either believe that person should be murdered or you believe we should pity the CEO as a poor defenseless victim. No. I believe the deeds of the CEO were immoral, but I believe laws should be abided by in a society, otherwise we fall into chaos. And it's not about what the victim deserves, in my opinion, or in anyone else's. It's about what the law says, and if the law is wrong, then the law should be changed. And I discussed this topic at length in this video, link in the description, but this also connects to the point about people not being able to be consistent with their convictions. Because most people wouldn't want random others to break laws that they just happen to not agree with, right? If I believe that all possessions are wrong, nobody cares. They would still call me a thief if I walk into someone's house and start taking shit for myself, right? But because they think that CEO guy deserves to be killed, they don't mind that someone broke a pretty biggie law and killed a man in cold blood. It's ridiculous reasoning, or lack of an ability for it. Another expression of not being consistent is that they can't seem to follow the meaning of concepts and words when they don't serve their arguments. For example, again, atheists versus theists. The theists tend to make the fallacy of asking, well, what came before the Big Bang then? Which is a nonsense question because the Big Bang is when time started. So you can't use a concept from time to discuss what happened before time. Asking what happened before the Big Bang is like asking what does Beethoven's Fifth smell like. You are mixing concepts, it makes no sense. But atheists, they do the same exact thing when they ask, well, who created God then? And they always seem to think that's like a checkmate move. It's not. You misunderstand the concept of God. God is the reason of reasons, the first link in the chain. There is no prior creator, just like there is no before the Big Bang. God is the alpha point by definition. Now, I'm not saying there is such a point necessarily. Maybe we live in a universe of eternal recurrence. But when we say God, the definition is the source of everything. So the source of everything cannot have a source by definition. That's like asking, when did eternity start? It's nonsense. It shows that you don't understand the meaning of the word. And then there's attaching an emotional baggage to the argument, or the identity that people try to tailor themselves through their beliefs. And that is the biggest thing that ruins any ability to properly debate and make any progress. Because once it has an emotional purpose, there's no argument. There's no fact on this planet that would make that person change their minds. Let me give you a strange example. I met this guy in big screen who declared very boldly that he cracked the code and he now understands what really happened in history. The Romans actually invented Christianity in order to control the Jews. And you know what is really amazing? Or not if you're familiar with, human psyche. This guy loves to find religious believers and ridicule them for how dumb and illogical their beliefs are. Oh, the irony! Because to anyone who knows even a little something about Roman religion and the history of Rome, Judea, and Christianity, this guy's theory is basically like an earth letters to anyone with a second grade understanding of math and physics. In an attempt to make him see how ridiculous that is, I said to him, okay, so your theory is that Rome, the empire that has been around for centuries and has never done anything like that, and managed to conquer half the world from their perspective because they stayed loyal to their gods, suddenly after centuries decided to invent a religion and adopt it just to keep the smallest, most insignificant province under control. And they did that after having sent in thousands upon thousands of troops to crush the never-stopping revolts. And he said they wanted to control the Jews. Like, you could hear in his voice that they shook him. That he was a second away from saying, okay, sounds like crap when you put it like that. But you know what? The next day he opened the room and he called it Rome invented Christianity. Even though he never gave any reason to support this ridiculous cartoonish theory of his. Because it has nothing to do with the facts or the truth. It has to do with how he perceives himself. As this red-pilled wise man who finds truth that no one else can. And no one will convince him otherwise. It didn't start with logic, so it won't be ended by it. And this, unfortunately, is true to most humans. At least most humans that I've encountered throughout my life, regardless of their beliefs. That's why I get shit from pro-Israelis when I critique Netanyahu's government of lunatics. That's why I get shit from pro-Palestinians when I bring up the historical fact that that identity was made up in the 60s. That's why I get shit from theists when I say that stories about a 900-year-old carpenter building a magic ark to save the animals of the world from the wrath of a god who wants to drown puppies for the sins of men, but is not smart enough to realize that fish won't drown, will not convince me to be a believer. And that's why I get shit from atheists when I say religion is not the problem or when I defend Islam. Because it's always about the emotional baggage. Because it's always about the manifesto. Because people are falling to logical fallacies and cannot be consistent. But I keep going. Because I'm an optimistic fool. With, the emphasis on the word fool. The times in my life when I met people who actually challenged my beliefs successfully with proper arguments that made me doubt everything and reevaluate are rare and few. But when that happens, it is absolutely glorious. So I keep chasing that high. Hopefully one day I'll find it again.